flight attendant slapped an elderly woman mid-flight, but what happened next flipped the entire airline upside down. It happened so fast, no one saw it coming. Row 14, seat C. A soft-spoken woman, hair silvered with time, gently adjusted her seatbelt while trying to settle into the thin cushion of her economy seat. It was just past 11:30 p.m., and most passengers were either dozing off or scrolling through their phones as Flight 227 from Nashville prepared for takeoff. Then, smack. A loud, sharp sound cracked through the hushed cabin. Heads turned. Some people gasped. A few even stood up, clutching the backs of seats to see what had just happened. In the center of it all, a woman was standing, tall, tense, flushed in the face, her navy blue uniform tight across her shoulders, fists clenched at her sides. Her name tag read, Kelsey Morgan, and just inches in front of her sat the woman she had just hit. There was no yelling, no swearing, no wild flailing, just silence. The elderly passenger, calm as a still lake, blinked once. She reached up and gently touched her cheek. Her skin, a rich brown tone, reddened slightly under the force of Kelsey's open hand, but her expression didn't change. She didn't raise her voice or stand up to challenge the woman now looming over her. She simply said, "You shouldn't have done that." Passengers looked around in confusion. One man shouted from the back, "What the hell is going on up there?" A flight attendant near the front hesitated, unsure whether to step in or stay put. Kelsey's voice cracked. She wouldn't listen. She wasn't fastening her seatbelt, and she kept ignoring instructions. "I never refused," the woman replied softly, her voice clear and composed. "You didn't give me a chance to explain." Kelsey opened her mouth to say something else, but nothing came out. Her hands trembled slightly now. From across the aisle, a teenage boy whispered to his dad, "Did that lady just get slapped by the flight attendant?" The father nodded, tight-lipped. "Yeah, she did." Everything felt out of place, off. The air got heavier. Flight attendants are trained to stay calm. They're trained to de-escalate. But this was something different, something personal. The woman, still seated, turned to the nearest flight attendant, Eli Walker, a younger crew member with a quiet demeanor and kind eyes, and said, "Could you please inform the pilot that Evelyn Brandt would like to speak with him before we take off?" The name meant nothing to most of the passengers, but Eli paused. He blinked, looked again, and then slowly nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said. His voice was shaking, just a little. Kelsey stared at Evelyn like she had just said something impossible. Her eyes narrowed. "Wait, who?" Evelyn leaned forward, opened her black leather carry-on, and pulled out a thin black wallet. From inside, she removed a card and held it out for Kelsey to read. She didn't raise it like a weapon. She didn't wave it around to make a scene. She simply handed it over politely. Kelsey took it. She read it once, then again. Evelyn Brandt, Chief Executive Officer, Skyreach Airlines. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out, just the sound of her own breath catching in her throat. But Kelsey wasn't the only one about to realize that things were far more complicated than they seemed. Evelyn Brandt didn't like attention, never had. She grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, back when colored girls weren't expected to finish school, let alone run companies. Her mother worked nights cleaning offices downtown, and her father, when he was still around, pushed carts at the train yard. Evelyn learned early on how to stay quiet, how to make herself small, how to let people underestimate her. That was her armor. While others shouted and demanded, Evelyn strategized. She waited. She learned. She planned. She earned a scholarship to Howard University, graduated near the top of her class, and eventually got a job pushing papers at the bottom of a corporate ladder at Skyreach Airlines, back when it was still called Southern Star Aviation and ran only 4 domestic routes. Most people never saw her coming. She didn't come up through PR or marketing. She didn't charm investors at cocktail parties or chase headlines. Evelyn rose through operations, maintenance schedules, crew management, compliance audits, logistics. She knew planes inside and out, from engine inspections to the human psychology of air travel. By the time the board named her CEO 2 months ago, half the staff still didn't know what she looked like, and that was exactly how she wanted it. So now, as she sat quietly in seat 14C, her cheeks still stinging and her ID card handed back to her, she watched Kelsey Morgan's entire worldview start to crumble. The card was real. The name was real. And the woman she had just accused of being defiant and rude was the very reason she had a paycheck. But Evelyn wasn't thinking about humiliation or revenge. She was thinking about her mother, how she used to get looked down on just for walking into stores, about her grandson, who just turned 13 and was already learning to keep his hands out of his hoodie when he walked through a parking lot. She was thinking about all the women who looked like her, who'd been told to stay quiet, to not cause trouble, to just endure. She was thinking about what to do next. "You okay, Ms. Brandt?" Eli asked softly, returning from the front of the plane. Evelyn nodded once, still calm. "Has the pilot been informed?" "He has," Eli said. "He asked if you'd like to come to the front, or if he should come to you." "I'll go," she said, then looking toward Kelsey, who was now frozen near the jump seat. "But I don't want her speaking to me again tonight." There was no anger in her tone, no heat, just control. Kelsey opened her mouth again, maybe to apologize, maybe to argue, but thought better of it. She looked at the floor. As Evelyn made her way down the aisle, heads turned to follow her. Some passengers whispered to each other. Others just stared, wide-eyed. They were piecing it together. She wasn't just some random old woman. She was somebody. She stepped through the curtain into first class, where the pilot, Captain Jeff Rains, a graying man with 28 years of experience, stood waiting for her. The moment he saw her face, he reached out his hand. "Ms. Brandt," he said, his voice tight. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea you were on this flight. I wish it had been under better circumstances." Evelyn took his hand. "It's all right, Jeff. I wasn't trying to be noticed. But this..." She glanced back toward the cabin. "This was more than just a misunderstanding." He nodded quietly. "We're still on the ground," she said. "I'm not canceling the flight, but I do want a written statement from the cabin crew, from all of them, and I want a report filed before we reach Seattle." "Understood," he said. "And when we land, I'll be contacting HR. She doesn't fly again until this is reviewed." Captain Rains looked like he wanted to say more, but just nodded. "Of course." Evelyn turned and headed back to her seat, calm and deliberate. She wasn't angry, she was focused. But outside that cabin door, the storm was just beginning to build. Kelsey Morgan had been wearing her navy blazer for 13 hours straight. Her bun was crooked, her heels were killing her, and her patience, what little was left of it, had snapped somewhere over Flagstaff during the last layover. She hadn't wanted to pick up this overnight flight to Seattle, but bills were piling up. Her sister had just asked for help with rent again, and her boyfriend, well, he hadn't exactly been helpful since he quit his job to find himself. So Kelsey said yes to the extra shift, hoping the bonus pay would be worth it. Now, sitting in the cramped galley at the back of the plane, she gripped a paper cup of water, hands trembling. Her mind replayed the slap over and over. What was I thinking? It hadn't been about the seatbelt, not really. The woman had been calm, maybe a little slow-moving, but not disrespectful. But something about the way she'd looked at Kelsey, like she didn't need her, like she wasn't impressed, like she saw right through her. That stare had crawled under Kelsey's skin, pulling up feelings she didn't know how to name. The truth? Kelsey had been walking a tightrope for months, smiling when she didn't want to, staying quiet when passengers snapped at her, biting her tongue when coworkers got promoted ahead of her. People always talked about how being a flight attendant was glamorous. Free flights, travel, hotel perks. They didn't talk about the exhaustion, the disrespect, the way people assumed she was a waitress in the sky. And if she ever pushed back, if she ever stood her ground, suddenly she was the problem, the angry one, the one who needed coaching. Kelsey wasn't a bad person, but that night she'd been tired, worn thin, and when she saw the older woman slowly reaching for her belt after being asked twice, she snapped. She didn't even think. Her hand moved faster than her mind. Now she felt sick. Eli returned to the galley and leaned against the storage cart across from her. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her breathe heavy. "She's the CEO," he finally said. Kelsey nodded. "I know." "No, Kelsey, I mean, she's the CEO." "I know who she is," she snapped. Then softer, "I know now." They sat in silence for a few seconds. "Do you think I'm going to get fired?" she asked. Eli didn't answer right away. "I think that depends more on how you act from this point forward than what already happened." "I didn't mean to." "I believe you, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen." Kelsey leaned her head back against the bulkhead. I swear she looked at me like she wasn't scared, like she knew she had the power the whole time. Eli sighed. She probably did. Kelsey had been taught all her life that if she wanted to get ahead, she had to be twice as polished, twice as friendly, twice as perfect. But standing there earlier, facing Evelyn Brandt, it hit her. This woman didn't have to perform. She didn't have to smile through it. She didn't have to prove anything. And somehow, that had irritated Kelsey more than she could admit. Now it was out of her hands. The pilot had already reported the incident. The other crew members had submitted their witness statements. HR would be waiting the moment they landed in Seattle. And Evelyn? She hadn't even raised her voice. That was what stung the most. No yelling, no threats, just a soft, deliberate request for action. That kind of composure, that kind of quiet strength, it was devastating. But what Kelsey didn't know yet was that sometimes the most painful lessons come dressed as silence. The moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was building long before the plane began to taxi, long before passengers found their seats, even before Evelyn boarded. The flight had already been delayed an hour and a half, a mechanical hold, some issue with a valve. People were tired, cranky, impatient. The gate crew had been short-staffed. They were late cleaning the cabin. Half the passengers were already irritated before they even stepped on board. When Evelyn walked onto the plane, dragging her black carry-on behind her, Kelsey barely glanced up. She gave the routine smile, the kind that disappears the second the passenger turns away. Good evening, Evelyn had said gently. Uh-huh, Kelsey replied, already turning to another boarding passenger. Evelyn found her seat, 14C aisle, and sat quietly, buckling herself in loosely as she adjusted her cardigan and pulled out a paperback book. She was slow, yes, her movements careful, but not rude, not difficult. Then came the announcements. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for departure. Kelsey moved through the aisles, doing final checks. She stopped at Evelyn's row. Ma'am, I need you to fasten your seatbelt. Evelyn looked up from her book. Yes, of course, she began, her fingers on the clasp. I said now, please, Kelsey interrupted, her voice louder than it needed to be. Evelyn didn't rush. She was used to being spoken over. She'd had a lifetime of that. She calmly finished buckling and said, I was just adjusting it. You were ignoring me. No, I wasn't. That was it. Those words, that tone. It wasn't what Evelyn said. It was the quiet confidence. The refusal to shrink. That's what did it. Kelsey leaned in closer. You don't get to talk to me like that. A couple sitting across the aisle looked up. I wasn't being disrespectful, Evelyn said, her voice still calm, still steady. Kelsey stepped forward. You think because you're older, you can just do whatever you want? This is federal regulation. I don't have time for... Evelyn held up a hand. I understand regulations. I was only... And that's when it happened. Kelsey's hand moved fast. No warning, no build-up. Just slap. The sound echoed. Gasps. A baby started crying somewhere near the back. Eli came jogging up the aisle. What's going on? Kelsey's chest was heaving now. She looked at her hand like it belonged to someone else. She wasn't following instructions, she muttered. Eli turned to Evelyn, who was still seated, her hands calmly folded in her lap. Ma'am, are you all right? I will be, Evelyn said, but I need to speak with the pilot immediately. That's when everything shifted. Passengers started murmuring. What did she say? Did the lady just ask for the pilot? Kelsey looked stunned. You're not allowed to just demand that. That's not how this works. Eli held up a hand toward her. Let's all just take a breath. No, Evelyn said, turning to Eli. You'll find Captain Rains in the cockpit. Tell him Evelyn Brandt is on board. Kelsey laughed nervously. Wait, that Evelyn Brandt? Eli blinked. He didn't laugh. You're serious? Kelsey whispered. Evelyn pulled out her wallet, handed over the ID, and watched the blood drain from Kelsey's face. Passengers leaned into the aisles. Phones were out now, not quite filming, but ready. No one spoke. The power dynamic had just flipped. Before the slap, Kelsey had felt in control, like she had the authority, like she was keeping order. But after, that authority evaporated. It melted right there, in front of everyone, replaced by fear, regret, confusion. She had put her hands on the CEO of the airline, on a black woman twice her age, in public, for no good reason. The shame hit like a wave. Kelsey turned and quickly walked back to the galley, chest tight, face burning. Passengers exchanged looks. Some shook their heads. One woman whispered to her husband, "She needs to be fired tonight." But Evelyn didn't react. She stayed in her seat. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand apologies or scream for justice. She simply waited, composed, patient, in full control. But every eye on that plane would now remember her, not as the woman who got slapped, but as the woman who never flinched. The cabin was quiet now. The engines hummed. The lights had dimmed for takeoff, but no one was sleeping. The air felt different, tense, thick, like it was holding its breath. Evelyn sat back in her seat, arms relaxed across her lap. She hadn't spoken since returning from her conversation with the captain. She hadn't looked in Kelsey's direction again. She didn't need to. Her presence said more than any words could. It wasn't just her title. It wasn't just the card. It was the way she carried herself. Shoulders square, eyes calm, dignity fully intact. Some passengers kept sneaking glances at her, like they were trying to reconcile what had happened. Was this really the woman who ran Skyreach Airlines? Sitting in economy, in row 14, reading a paperback? Who does that? Someone who's watching. That's who. Someone who knows that leadership doesn't always need a spotlight. Captain Rains had made an announcement, short and controlled. "We apologize for the earlier disruption. We're in contact with our operations team. All safety procedures have been followed. We appreciate your patience." It was vague enough to protect the company, but anyone paying attention already knew something big had happened. Kelsey had been replaced in the aisle by another attendant for the rest of the flight. She stayed in the galley, silent. Her eyes were glassy. Her hands fidgeted constantly. She looked like someone waiting for judgment to fall. Because she was. Meanwhile, up front, a flight services supervisor was being patched through mid-air from Skyreach's main office in Phoenix, Arizona. The call wasn't about turbulence or routine scheduling. It was about Evelyn. News had reached corporate before the plane even left the ground. A passenger had tweeted something vague. "Y'all not gonna believe what just happened on Skyreach Flight 227. CEO just got slapped in the face by her own staff." And that was enough. The tweet was gaining traction. Screenshots were already circling. People were asking questions. Who is she? What happened? Is it true? By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, senior leadership was scrambling. The media department drafted a holding statement. Legal reviewed Kelsey's file. HR prepared an emergency protocol. This wasn't just a personnel issue now, it was a PR crisis. But back in seat 14C, Evelyn hadn't touched her phone. She wasn't on social media. She wasn't giving interviews. She hadn't called her assistant or demanded a lawyer. She was thinking about how a uniform can make someone feel bigger than they are, thinking about how people treat strangers when they think no one's watching, thinking about how much harder it always seems to be just to be treated like a person when you don't fit the picture they had in mind. And most of all, she was thinking about what she wanted this moment to mean. Not for revenge, not for power, but for truth. Truth that some problems don't get fixed with apologies. That respect shouldn't depend on status. That you can't train your way out of bias if you're never willing to name it. A light blinked above. The fasten seatbelt sign switched off. People started shifting in their seats. Someone offered Evelyn a snack from their backpack. A quiet gesture. She accepted it with a small smile. The ripple had already begun, but not just in the media or the airline's boardroom. In that cabin, among those passengers, among the people who watched an elderly woman of color get struck, and watched her not just endure it, but rise above it without saying a word. But Evelyn wasn't finished. Because once they landed, silence wouldn't be enough anymore. The plane touched down in Seattle-Tacoma International Airport just after 2:15 a.m. As the wheels hit the runway, some passengers clapped. Not the usual applause for a safe landing, but the awkward kind, like people unsure what to do with what they just lived through. Evelyn stayed seated. She waited until the plane had fully taxied and the fasten seatbelt sign turned off. People stood and gathered their belongings, but there was none of the usual chatter. No small talk about connections or luggage, just quiet tension. Word had spread. Even those who hadn't seen the slap now knew. When the cabin door opened, two people were already waiting outside on the jet bridge. Rachel Lim, Skyreach's Director of Human Resources, and Daniel Obasi, the Regional Manager for the airline's West Coast operations. They'd been called in the moment. Corporate confirmed Evelyn was on board. Both looked tired, serious. Evelyn exited last. Kelsey was nowhere in sight. Rachel extended her hand. "Ms. Brandt, we're so sorry. We've already grounded the flight attendant involved and launched an investigation. If you'd prefer to speak in private..." Evelyn held up a hand, calm as ever. "No need to pull me aside. I don't want this handled in the dark." Rachel nodded slowly. "Understood." Passengers began filing out behind her, some still glancing her way. A few mouthed silent apologies. One woman gently touched Evelyn's arm and said, "Thank you for how you handled it." Evelyn smiled. "You're welcome." The next morning, the story exploded. News outlets picked it up before sunrise. The clip from someone's phone, blurry, shaky, but unmistakable, was already viral. Think pieces popped up. Radio hosts debated it. Comment sections flooded with opinions. Some people called for Kelsey's immediate termination. Others asked questions. Would this be handled the same way if Evelyn hadn't been CEO? What if she had been someone else entirely? And that was exactly Evelyn's point. She issued a public statement that afternoon. It wasn't flashy. No PR buzzwords, just plain words from a plain background. "I didn't speak out to defend my title. I spoke out because I could. Because most people in my position, especially black elders, don't get the chance. They're expected to stay quiet, not to cause trouble, to let it go. But the truth is, letting it go is what keeps the problem going. I don't want Miss Morgan fired. I want her to face what happened, to own it, to learn from it. And I want our airline, and every company that serves the public, to do better when it comes to seeing people for who they are, not who you assume they are." The message landed harder than any policy could have. Some applauded her grace. Some called it too soft. But Evelyn didn't need to please everyone. A week later, Kelsey Morgan released her own statement. No legal team, no spin, just her. "I didn't recognize who I was in that moment. I reacted from a place of stress, frustration, and, if I'm being honest, bias I didn't even realize I carried. What I did was wrong. No excuses. I've been offered a chance to go through training, counseling, and a probationary period. I accepted all of it. Not to save my job, but because I need to be better. Ms. Brandt showed me more compassion than I deserved. I will never forget that." Skyreach implemented a new training program weeks later, created in collaboration with passengers, flight crews, and community advocates. Evelyn didn't put her name on it. She didn't need credit. Her message had already reached far beyond the cabin of Flight 227. It reached homes, classrooms, boardrooms. People who never once thought about the power of perception now paused before making assumptions, not because they were told to, but because they'd seen what happens when someone responds to harm with clarity, not chaos, with strength, not rage, with accountability, not revenge. Because sometimes the loudest change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing tall, even after someone tries to put you down. If this story made you think, share it. Talk about it. Ask yourself how you treat people, especially when no one's watching. And most importantly, don't just call for change. Live it.